The hallway stretched without end, its walls closing in on me with each step I dared to take. The peeling wallpaper hung in strips, curling downward like shedding skin, revealing something darker beneath. A dampness clung to the air, heavy and suffocating, and I could hear droplets hitting the floor in uneven intervals, as though the walls themselves were bleeding. The silence around me wasn't empty, it was filled with a pressure, a weight, as if the very building was holding its breath. The light above me buzzed and flickered, humming in a way that seemed too deliberate, almost as if it was aware of my presence. Shadows shifted in the corners of my eyes, never visible when I turned to face them, but always there, moving just out of reach. The air seemed colder with each passing second, the chill burrowing deep into my bones. I wanted to tell myself it was only a dream, but my body wouldn't believe the lie. Every step I took echoed unnaturally, the sound bouncing off the walls and returning to me in ways that didn't make sense. Sometimes the echo came too quickly, as though my footsteps were followed by another pair, softer and delayed. I stopped walking, but the echo didn't stop with me. It carried on to 3 more steps, so silence fell again. The hair on the back of my neck rose, and I realized I was no longer walking alone. I turned sharply, expecting to see someone, anyone, standing there. But the hallway behind me was just as empty, stretching back into darkness without end. My heart pounded louder than my footsteps, and I listened so hard it hurt. It was nothing but the steady drip, drip, drip of the walls and the faint, broken hum of the lights. And yet, I knew it. Something was there, watching, waiting. I pressed forward, my pace quicker now, though I tried not to run. The further I walked, the more the walls seemed to close in, tightening like a throat around me. The air grew damp and stale, filling my lungs with something sour, making me cough. The shadows began to take shape along the edges of my vision, long and stretching, moving in rhythm with me, but never quite matching. The lights above me flickered harder, bursts of darkness breaking across the hallway like blinking eyes. For an instant, I saw figures in the dark, too tall, too thin, their heads bent at impossible angles. When the light returned, the hallway was empty once more, but the echo came again. Not mine this time, a deliberate step, slow, heavy, closer than before. My body froze, every instinct screaming for me to turn back, but I knew there was nothing behind me that I wanted to see. So I walked forward, my steps trembling, my breath shallow, carrying the knowledge that whatever followed me wasn't simply walking, it was hunting. And no matter how far I went, the hallway would never let me reach the end. There it was, standing in the middle of the hallway where there had never been anything before. A door. Its wood was old, warped, and swollen, as if it had been pulled up from somewhere damp and forgotten. I could swear it moved ever so slightly, rising and falling in shallow breaths, as though the door itself was alive. The closer I came, the more I could hear a faint thumping within it, something deep and rhythmic, like a heartbeat pressed into the wood. I reached out with a hand that felt unwilling to obey me. The brass handle, tarnished and green with age, seemed to pulse with warmth. My fingers hovered just above it, trembling in the air, when suddenly the handle twisted on its own. The latch clicked, loud and sharp against the silence, and the door slowly creaked open. The sound was too long, too drawn out, as though the hinges were savoring the moment of being disturbed. Darkness inside was complete, swallowing everything before me, but it wasn't an empty kind of dark. It felt thick, textured, filled with movement I couldn't see, but could sense brushing against my skin. A cold draft seeped out, carrying with it a smell like old earth and metal, damp and suffocating. I wanted to step back, to close the door, and pretend I had never seen it, but the opening seemed to grow wider the more I hesitated. Something pulled at me, not physically, but inside my chest, a pressure that urged me to move forward. My foot lifted before I even realized it, the weight of my body shifting toward the threshold as if I no longer had control. My breath hitched as my shadow spilled into the dark space, and, for a split second, I thought I saw another shadow reach back, stretching long and eager toward me. I paused, my hand gripping the doorframe, the wood rough beneath my skin. I strained to hear something, anything from the blackness beyond, but there was only silence. Then came a faint whisper, so close it seemed to brush against my ear, though I knew I hadn't stepped through. The voice was mine. Low, distorted, repeating my name over and over, like an echo from a place I was never meant to hear. My chest tightened as fear and curiosity tangled together, each one feeding the other. The whisper grew louder, overlapping with itself, surrounding me from every angle until it filled the space of my mind. The air seemed to press inward, heavy and suffocating, urging me to make a choice, step inside or close the door. But even then, I knew, deep down, it was never really a choice. I leaned forward, the threshold stretching before me like the mouth of something hungry. The whisper cut off suddenly, leaving behind a silence that rang in my ears. The door waited, wide and unyielding, as though it knew the moment I crossed, I would never return the same. My hand slipped from the frame, and with a slow, trembling breath, I stepped into the darkness. The room was empty, except for the mirror, tall and cracked at its edges, leaning against the far wall as though it had been waiting for me. The glass shimmered faintly in the dim light, and though I stood directly in front of it, the surface didn't show me. It showed someone else. A shape that looked like me, but it was not mine. My chest tightened as I stared, expecting the reflection to catch up, to mimic, but it remained motionless, a stranger in my skin. Its eyes were hollow, too deep and too dark, sinking into a void that had no end. They didn't blink, didn't shift, just stared through me, as if I were the reflection, not it. Then its mouth began to move, curling into a grin so wide and sharp it stretched unnaturally across its face. My own lips were still pressed together. Teeth, yet the glass version of me revealed a row of teeth that seemed too many to belong to a human mouth. I stepped closer, cautiously, testing it, waiting for it to mimic, but it didn't. Its head tilted slightly to the side, the motion slow and deliberate, the sound of creaking bone echoing in the silence as though I could hear its every movement. My hand raised on instinct, and the reflection didn't follow. Instead, it let its arm hang lifelessly, its grin widening, twitching at the edges like something struggling to hold form. The air grew colder, the nearer I leaned toward the glass. A thin fog rolled over the surface, condensing as though the mirror itself was breathing. My breath came quicker, shallow and uneven, while its chest never rose. My lungs felt heavy, like they were being filled with stones, while the reflection's body remained impossibly still, motionless, except for the twisting grin. Then I heard it. A whisper, faint and broken, seeping not from the glass, but from inside my own head. It repeated my name, slow and deliberate, dragging out each syllable until it no longer sounded like my name at all. It was my voice, but distorted, hollow, as though pulled from a version of me that had never lived. I clutched my ears, but the whisper pressed on, vibrating through my skull. The reflection leaned forward without moving its feet, its body stretching unnaturally closer until its face nearly touched the other side of the glass. Its grin vanished suddenly, replaced with a thin, expressionless mouth that didn't move as the whisper grew louder in my mind. I tried to back away, but my body resisted, my muscles tense and frozen. The mirror pulled me in with its silence, holding me prisoner before my own impossible likeness. I stared into those hollow eyes, and for one unbearable moment, I thought I saw something moving behind them, a flicker, a shape, a life that wasn't mine. The whisper fell silent, but the reflection didn't disappear. It only waited, patient and unblinking, as though it knew that sooner or later the glass would no longer be a barrier. It would be a doorway, and when it opened, I wouldn't be the one who stepped through. The walls quivered as though they were alive, stretching outward one moment and collapsing inward the next, breathing in and out in rhythms I couldn't match. The ceiling tilted above me like a shifting horizon, its plaster cracking and reforming in patterns that looked almost intentional. Each surface folded into itself like wet paper, reshaping into angles that should not have been possible. I could not trust my eyes anymore, yet every movement of the house pressed closer to me, forcing me deeper into its distorted maze. Doors appeared where there had been none, their frames uneven, slanting, some half swallowed by the walls, as if the house itself were unsure whether to let me through. I reached for one and watched as the knob sank back into the wall, vanishing completely. Another door revealed itself in the corner, impossibly tall, but when I blinked, it was gone, replaced with nothing but the stretched skin of peeling wallpaper. The rules of space and shape no longer belonged to me. Windows burst open along the walls, but instead of sky or landscape, I saw only shifting rooms beyond places I had already been, looping endlessly back toward me. I leaned toward one window and saw myself staring back. Just a glimpse, my face pressed against the glass, eyes wide with confusion. When I stepped back, the reflection stayed for a moment too long before sliding out of sight. The staircase wound upward, twisting like a corkscrew into the ceiling. It beckoned me with a promise of escape, and I began to climb, the wooden steps groaning underfoot. Yet, after only a handful of steps, I was back where I began, standing again at the base of the stairs, staring upward into the same spiral that mocked me with its endless loop. My stomach turned, unsure if I had climbed at all, or if the house had simply reset me in place. The floor shifted beneath me, rising and sinking as though floating on waves. Furniture scraped across unseen surfaces, sliding from one end of the room to another, sometimes vanishing into the walls only to reappear above me on the ceiling. Chairs dangled upside down, swinging slightly, as if they had been nailed there with intent. I tried not to look, but the sight of a table dragging itself slowly across the plaster above was impossible to ignore. Every room bled into the next, twisting into a new shape before I could learn the last. I would step into a hallway, and midway through, it would close behind me, merging into another chamber, one I swore I had passed minutes before. The air grew thick with dust and the scent of rotting wood, so strong it coated the back of my throat. My mind screamed for the house to stop, to settle into something recognizable, but it refused, reshaping itself with cruel patience. At last, I understood the truth. The house wasn't broken. It wasn't haunted, either. It was alive, bending and shifting, not because it was decaying, but because it was watching me, testing me, reshaping itself around me like a predator closing its jaws. Every wall was a rib, every door a vein, and I was not walking through a home anymore. I was moving deeper into the belly of something that intended to keep me. Through the shattered frame of the window, the forest called to me, its black branches stretching outward like skeletal hands. The moment my feet touched the earth, I felt the ground breathe beneath me, damp and restless, as though it had been waiting. A path unfolded without warning, narrow and uneven, guiding me between the trees. The air was sharp with the scent of moss and rot, clinging to my lungs as I stepped deeper, unable to turn back. The trees leaned closer the farther I walked, their trunks impossibly tall, blotting out the moonlight until the sky was gone. Their bark was rough, scarred with deep grooves that looked too deliberate to be natural, more like letters carved in a forgotten tongue. When the wind passed through them, I swore I heard the grooves whisper, carrying 1,000 voices, too faint to understand. Each gust felt like words brushing past my ears, pressing against my mind. Branches reached down and snagged at my clothes, tugging at me with a sharp insistence, their tips scraping like fingernails against my skin. Every time I pulled free, another reached for me, refusing to let me move without a struggle. The deeper I went, the more the branches seemed to bend on their own, not swaying with the wind, but deliberately angling toward me, drawing closer, like hunters that had found their prey. The ground grew uneven, shifting into soft soil that swallowed my steps, pulling me down with each move forward. My feet sank ankle-deep, the earth sucking at me, releasing only when I forced myself onward. The forest groaned low and steady, a sound that seemed to rise from the roots beneath me, echoing in my bones as though the earth itself was speaking. I knew then I was no longer walking on neutral ground. I was trespassing. Darkness thickened between the trees, so heavy it seemed alive. Shapes began to flicker at the edges of my sight, moving swiftly from trunk to trunk, never giving me more than a glimpse. Sometimes they looked like elongated shadows, stretching far too tall. Other times they appeared hunched, crawling low to the ground with limbs that bent wrong. Each time I turned, there was nothing but trees, silent and still, though my heart told me otherwise. A cold shiver crept across my skin when I realized the shadows weren't only watching, they were following. My own footsteps no longer echoed alone. There was a second rhythm, delayed by only a fraction of a second, like something learning how to walk just behind me. The whispers in the bark grew louder, overlapping, until it sounded like laughter, soft, breathless, and cruel. I broke into a run, tearing through the branches as they clawed and scraped, but the forest bent with me, stretching longer, refusing to let me escape. My legs burned, my lungs clawed for air, yet no matter how fast I moved, the shadows moved faster, closer, feeding off my fear. And in that endless sprint, I knew I had entered a place that would never let me leave whole. 'Cause the forest did not want a visitor, wanted a sacrifice. The platform stretched out before me, cracked and hollow, its boards soft with rot that gave slightly under my weight. A faded roof sagged above, the rusted beams groaning with each breath of wind. No signs marked the station, no lamps burned to light the way, and yet it felt impossibly familiar, like I had been there before, waiting for something that had never come. The silence was absolute, thick enough to drown my thoughts, until a faint whistle broke through the air, distant but sharp, cutting through the emptiness. The sound grew closer, rolling over the landscape in waves, but there was no light, no train, no motion on the tracks. Only the whistle, shrill and constant, as though it were circling around me rather than approaching. My eyes strained against the darkness beyond the platform, desperate for the glow of a headlamp, for the shape of steel carving through the night. But the tracks remained empty, stretching into shadows that seemed to go on forever. Then the ground began to shake, a low vibration that climbed steadily into a rumble beneath my feet. The boards creaked and shivered, dust falling in faint trails from the roof above. The metal rails moaned as though something enormous pressed against them, bending their shape, but still nothing came into view. My heart beat faster, unsure whether to anticipate the arrival of salvation or the descent of something far worse. The whistle changed. It grew jagged, broken, the clean note splitting into a distorted cry, half mechanical and half alive. It carried a tone that pierced the air, vibrating through my skull until I clenched my jaw against it. The sound wasn't a call anymore, it was a warning, an announcement of something that did not belong on any timetable, something that had no destination but me. A shadow appeared at the far end of the platform, stretching long across the tracks. At first, it looked like smoke, twisting and curling into the air, but it thickened quickly, solidifying into something vast and towering. The rumble of the ground grew violent, knocking me to my knees as the boards cracked beneath the force. The rails buckled, groaning in pain, their lines warping outward as though they were being torn apart from below. The air reeked of iron and ash, each breath searing my throat. The whistle blared again, but this time it came from within the shadow itself, shrieking like something dying and endless at once. My body trembled with the instinct to run, but my legs would not obey. The shadow loomed closer, bending, leaning, dragging itself along the tracks with a sound like metal claws ripping into earth. And then I understood. This was no train. The tracks were not meant to carry it, the platform not meant to receive it. Whatever had come was older, heavier, a thing that had worn the disguise of a train only to lure me here. The whistle was its voice, the rumble its breath, and the tracks were nothing but the veins it followed. As it drew nearer, I realized the station had never been abandoned, had simply been waiting, just like the thing that had finally arrived. The ground gave way beneath me without warning, the boards splintering into jagged shards that clawed at my arms as I fell. I crashed into darkness, landing hard on a floor that was colder than stone. The air there was damp and choking, heavy with the stench of rot and mildew, as if the place had been sealed for centuries. I coughed, the sound swallowed instantly by the thick silence around me, a silence so total it made my ears ache. My eyes adjusted slowly, and the shape of the basement revealed itself low ceiling. Walls slick with condensation, pipes dripping in slow, steady beats that echoed like a clock counting down. The room stretched farther than it should have, the corners fading into blackness as though the space had no end. I could feel the weight of the house above pressing down, trapping me, burying me alive in its stomach. In the far corner, something stood, still, waiting. My breath caught as my gaze fixed on it, because, though I could see no face, no eyes, I knew it was staring directly at me. Its skin was pale, smooth, featureless, like melted wax molded into the rough shape of a person. It did not sway, did not breathe, yet every part of me screamed that it was alive, and worse, aware. The air grew colder the longer I looked, until my teeth began to chatter against my will. I wanted to cry out, to demand it move, to prove it was nothing but a trick of shadow, but my throat locked shut. My lips pressed together so tightly they ached, as though some unseen hand had sealed them. Panic surged in my chest, thrashing for release, but no sound could escape. My silence belonged to the figure. It shifted, only slightly, the barest tilt of his head, and the movement rattled through me like a blade drawn across bone. My body refused to run, my legs rooted to the ground, as if the basement itself had fastened me in place. The figure did not advance, yet with each second it seemed closer, its presence swelling until it filled every inch of the room. I could feel it breathing without breath, pressing against my skin like an invisible tide. A low hum began to rise, not from the air, not from the walls, but from inside my skull. It was steady, vibrating, a soundless sound that made my vision blur at the edges. The figure leaned forward ever so slightly, and though its face remained blank, I could sense a mouth forming, stretching open in silence. My lungs burned, desperate for a scream, but the silence held fast, sealing me deeper into myself. Then, in the stillness, it moved its hand slow, deliberate tracing it toward me, fingers long and waxen. The moment it lifted, the pipes around me groaned, water spilling like blood across the floor. The hum in my head grew sharp, stabbing, and I knew the figure wanted something more than just to watch. It wanted me silent forever, trapped in the basement where no sound could ever escape. I woke up in my bed, or I thought I did. The hallway outside my room was waiting for me. The door that shouldn't exist was still there, and when I checked the mirror, I wasn't smiling anymore. But my reflection was, the dream never ended. It just moved into my life, and now, every night when I close my eyes, I wonder, will I ever wake up again, or am I already gone?